Thanks for having me.
And let's dive into the politics of the president and Russia. I'm joined now by Hugh Hewitt, the host of Hugh Hewitt on MSNBC and the host of the Hugh Hewitt Show on Salem Radio Networks. Hugh, good to see you.
Good to see you, Katie.
Why do you think there's such a disconnect between the actions of the administration and the words of the president?
I think the president's silence is very studied here, Katie, and I agree with almost everything Ambassador McFaul just told you. The one thing I would disagree with is maybe he didn't have time to say it, is that sometimes what we see and hear is not what's going on at all. Today in Moscow, 23 different countries had their ambassadors summoned to expel 59 diplomats. That makes 27 countries that have been sanctioned by Russia in the aftermath of Britain and the United States sanctioning Russia. We are in a very tense situation, and our colleague Admiral Stavridis said on my radio show this morning he would like to see 60 days of no one saying anything so that we could get everything calmed down, and then to cooperate where we can and confront where we must. And I think the president's silence is actually strategic here and useful, especially, and I know the reporting is coming in slow, in the Middle East tonight. The Palestinians are alleging 15 Palestinians were killed by Israelis in clashes on the Gaza border. The Russians are on the northern border of Israel. The Gaza is the southern border for our audience who don't know the region too well. But it's all very doggone close. So there's something to be said for a great deal of care in the White House and the president right now on matters foreign affairs, Russian and Middle East related.
Past presidents have tried to reset with Vladimir Putin. They've tried to warm up relations between the U.S. and Russia. They've tried to befriend him. They've tried to get him on our side, maybe see eye to eye. Do you think that that is possible? And is that, after everything we've seen in the past, the best strategy for the president not to come out and be as tough on Vladimir Putin as, say, he is as publicly tough on someone like Kim Jong-un?
Vice President Cheney once told me on the air that he looked into Mr. Putin's eyes and he saw a KGB colonel. And I tend to agree completely with Vice President Cheney on that matter. We're dealing with a KGB colonel and a seasoned intelligence operator, and obviously the ex-GRU agent who was murdered by a chemical weapon that had 130 other casualties, not mortal, but casualties in Great Britain. You're dealing with a ruthless government and a government that attacked our election, and a very sinister government that launched its biggest ICBM, a 10-warhead ICBM called colloquially Satan II this week. And if President Trump said, if you want to have an arms race, I'll win, that's a good message to send on the telephone, not on Twitter. It really is. It's better to say that to Vladimir Putin offline than online. I think you'd agree with that, Katie. So I don't think there's much hope of doing anything with Vladimir Putin until we rebuild the military that was decimated over the last decade by sequester, and until we get our allies lined up, as appears to be happening. One more thing that the ambassador noted. This administration sent lethal aid to Ukraine. It's been much tougher on Russia than the last administration across a whole host of things. I don't think we need harsh words in addition to...
He said that it's following in line with the Obama administration. They have taken steps that are tougher, including that one, but he didn't say much tougher.
He said double down.
Yeah,
he said double down. I think that's 100% better.
Let me ask you this. The president's own public posture, how can the United States truly get tough on Russia, truly get tough on the country that meddled in the 2016 election, if the president himself is trying to undermine the investigation into that meddling?
Well, I think quickly confirm Mike Pompeo as Secretary of State. He's a hawk. He's a Russia hawk. John Bolton arrives in the White House on April 9. There's no one. He's a Reagan conservative, full stop, not a neocon, not an interventionist, just a Reagan peace through strength conservative. Get him installed with the staff that he wants. And Gina Haspel confirmed as CIA director. Get her confirmed very quickly. Then you've got the new foreign policy team with Pompeo as the right arm, Jim Mattis as the left hook, Bolton and John Kelly as the corner men, and Haspel in the booth. I love this new foreign policy team, Katie, and I think it will be the quiet strength of quiet men like George Shultz and James Baker and Mike Pompeo and Gina Haspel and men and women, obviously, is what is most needed at this moment in the world.
But don't you also need the backing of the American public? Because right now, Donald Trump goes after the special counsel's investigation, goes after this investigation into what is at its heart Russian meddling so often and so frequently that he is undercutting the public opinion of whether or not Russia actually did anything wrong. Without general American support for this, general American belief that it actually happened, and he's been trashing the intelligence community over this, Don't you think that affects our ability to be tough on Russia?
No, I think it's possible. Secretary Clinton told me on the radio, it's possible to hold two thoughts. I don't think he should attack the special counsel at all. I think he should let that investigation run its course and say nothing about Mueller, because I don't think there's any collusion to be proven, and everything that looks like obstruction ends up being overheated. But at the same time, get that defense budget as it was, passed up to $700 billion, get the Columbia submarine out there with new missile technology, deploy forward, recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, as we ought to have done a long time ago. I'm happy with our foreign policy, and I prefer
what about enact cybersecurity and make sure that our elections can't be meddled in again? What about that giant piece of the puzzle that's going unaddressed?
Absolutely. It was addressed in the defense budget. Things Lindsey Graham has told me is that part of that defense increase goes into our cyber capability. It all begins with money. It all begins with the Pentagon's
That's over
resources.
A year later, and we have the 2018 midterms coming up. Voting has already started. Why did it take so long? And is it going to be in place to make sure that 2020 goes off without a hitch?
I think the defense appropriation bill ought to have passed out of the Senate far earlier than it did. I put the blame for that squarely on the Democrats and Chuck Schumer. So that's a partisan dispute that has never before held up the Defense Appropriations Act. And it has now. But we've broken the impasse, and that's a good thing, Katie, because it used to be that politics stopped at the water's edge. It ought to come back, and we ought to have a very strong defense, and it ought to be bipartisan.
Hugh Hewitt. Hugh, thank you so much for joining us.